The mirror in my grandmother's attic had always fascinated me. It was an antique, with an ornate, gold-leaf frame and a surface that seemed to ripple like water under certain lights. As a child, I would spend hours in that attic, playing among dusty relics and heirlooms. The attic was a place of wonder for me, a treasure trove of forgotten memories and history. But it was the mirror that held my attention, drawing me back time and again with an almost magnetic pull. Years later, after my grandmother passed away, I inherited the house. Moving back felt like stepping into a time capsule, every corner of the home brimming with memories. The familiar smell of old wood and lavender polish greeted me as I stepped through the door. The mirror still hung in the attic, its allure undiminished by time. It seemed to call to me, just as it had when I was a child. One rainy afternoon, with nothing else to do, I decided to clean the attic. Armed with a feather duster and a sense of nostalgia, I climbed the creaky wooden steps. Dust motes swirled in the air, illuminated by the dim light filtering through the small window. The attic was just as I remembered, cluttered with old furniture, trunks, and the countless knickknacks my grandmother had collected over the years. I approached the mirror, my reflection wavering in its aged glass. As I wiped away layers of dust, I noticed something odd. My reflection didn't quite match my movements. I would lift my arm, and the mirrored me would hesitate for a heartbeat before following suit. I laughed it off, attributing it to the antique glass, but the unease lingered. The feeling that something was off gnawed at the back of my mind. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself drawn to the mirror more and more. Its pull was irresistible, like an unsolved puzzle begging for a solution. One night, I decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight, I stood before the mirror, staring intently at my reflection. Minutes ticked by, and just as I was about to give up, I saw it. A shadow moved behind my reflection. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing there. The attic was empty, just as it had been moments before. I turned back to the mirror, my heart pounding. My reflection stared back, wide-eyed and trembling, a perfect mimic of my fear. I told myself it was a trick of the light, my imagination running wild. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. The next night, it happened again. And the night after that. Each time, the shadow grew clearer, more defined. It was a person, standing just behind my reflection, their features obscured by darkness. I couldn't make out any details, but their presence was unmistakable. It felt like someone was watching me from just beyond the glass, their eyes boring into my soul. I stopped going to the attic. The unease had grown into full-blown dread. Days passed, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I walked by the attic door, a chill ran down my spine. I began to hear whispers, soft and indistinct, just on the edge of hearing. They seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere, filling the silence of the house with a disquieting presence. At night, my dreams were filled with shadows and reflections that moved on their own. One evening, I found a journal among my grandmother's things. Flipping through its pages, I discovered entries that mentioned the mirror. She wrote about seeing strange things in its depths, shadows that seemed to reach out to her. Her last entry was a warning. The mirror shows more than just reflections. Beware. Determined to put an end to this madness, I decided to confront whatever was in the mirror. Armed with my grandmother's journal and a newfound resolve, I climbed the stairs one last time. The attic was colder than I remembered, the air thick with an oppressive presence. It felt as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for what was to come. I stood before the mirror, the journal clutched in my hand. My reflection stared back at me, eyes wide with fear. Taking a deep breath, I called out, "Who are you? What do you want?" The reflection's lips moved, but the voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a whisper that seemed to seep into my bones. "I am what you fear," it said. "I am what you seek." My reflection's face twisted into a grotesque grin, and the shadow behind it stepped forward. merging with my mirrored self. Panic surged through me, but I couldn't look away. The figure in the mirror raised its hand, and I felt an icy grip on my shoulder. I tried to pull away, but my body wouldn't respond. The world around me blurred, and I felt a dizzying sensation as if I were being pulled through the glass. I found myself standing in a dark, mirrored version of the attic. Everything was the same, yet distorted, the air thick with an oppressive silence. It was as if I had crossed into another reality, one that existed parallel to my own. The shadow stood before me, now a fully formed figure. Its eyes were hollow, voids that seemed to swallow the light. "You wanted to know," it whispered, "and now you're here." I stumbled back, my heart racing. "What do you want from me?" It tilted its head, a mocking imitation of curiosity. "To exist," it replied. "To be free. Your fear, your curiosity, brought me to life. Now you will take my place." Before I could react, it lunged at me. I felt an icy coldness wash over me, and my vision went dark. When I opened my eyes, I was staring at myself from the other side of the mirror. I screamed, but no sound came out. The figure that had taken my place smiled, a cold, cruel expression. Days turned into weeks, and I watched helplessly from my prison as the figure lived my life. It mimicked me perfectly, fooling everyone. My friends, my family, they had no idea that the person they saw wasn't me. It was a master of deception, wearing my face like a mask. I tried everything to break free, but the mirror held me fast. The attic became my world, a silent, unchanging prison. I watched as the figure in my body grew stronger, feeding off my despair. It reveled in my suffering, taking pleasure in my helplessness. One day, it brought someone new to the attic, a curious friend. As they stood before the mirror, I saw the shadow behind them, just as it had once been behind me. The cycle was beginning again. Desperation filled me, but there was nothing I could do. The mirror had claimed me, and it would claim another. As the shadow reached out, I could only watch, a silent witness to the horror that had become my existence. The last thing I saw before the world went dark was the figure's grin, a reflection of my own despair. And then, there was only silence. To this day, the mirror remains in the attic, waiting for the next curious soul to fall into its trap. And I, a prisoner of reflections, can do nothing but watch and wait, a silent shadow in the glass. I am the echo of fear, trapped in a world of reflections, forever yearning for freedom I can never attain.